The moment she took my hand, I forgot that we were lost. The corn around us stood taller than our heads, turning the golden afternoon into a maze of shadows, rustling leaves, and endless wrong turns. Somewhere behind us, the cheerful voices of families and children had completely disappeared. There was only the sound of our footsteps pressing into the dry earth, the distant cry of a crow, and the nervous beating of my own heart. Then my neighbor, Elara, looked at me with a small, almost mischievous smile and gently intertwined her fingers with mine. She whispered that maybe we should stay lost for a little while. I wanted to laugh, but something inside me became strangely quiet. Because for the first time in years, being lost didn't feel frightening. It felt like the first place where I had finally found something I wasn't looking for. If you believe that kindness, unexpected moments, and second chances can change someone's life, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House for more heart-touching stories. I had moved into the neighborhood only 3 months earlier, carrying 2 suitcases, a few boxes, and the kind of exhaustion that comes from pretending everything is fine when it isn't. My name is Rowan, and after losing my job and watching a relationship I thought would last forever quietly fall apart, I had started over in a small rented house on the edge of town. I didn't know many people, and honestly, I wasn't trying very hard to meet anyone. My days were mostly work searches, grocery runs, and long evenings sitting beside my window with a cup of coffee that usually went cold before I remembered to drink it. Then there was Elara, the woman who lived 2 houses away. I had noticed her before I ever spoke to her. She was always carrying something, a basket of flowers, a stack of books, a paper bag filled with groceries, or sometimes nothing at all except a bright smile she seemed to give freely to everyone. She had this unusual habit of waving whenever our eyes met, even if we were standing across the street. I always waved back, but I never had the courage to start a conversation. That changed on a cool Saturday afternoon when the neighborhood organized an autumn festival at a nearby farm. The place was filled with pumpkins, wooden stalls, warm apple cider, children running between hay bales, and strings of little lights hanging above the picnic area. The main attraction was an enormous corn maze that covered several acres. I wasn't planning to enter, but I heard someone behind me laughing and recognized Elara's voice. She had somehow convinced herself that getting lost in a corn maze was an excellent way to spend an afternoon. When she noticed me, she smiled and invited me along. I almost said no. I had become very good at saying no to things that might make me feel something. But there was something about the way she asked, as if my company actually mattered, that made me change my mind. At first, the maze was easy. We followed the signs, joked about how dramatic the whole thing was, and occasionally stopped to admire the sunlight shining through the corn leaves. Elara told me stories about growing up in the area, about her grandmother's garden and the tiny bakery she used to visit as a child. I found myself telling her things I hadn't told anyone in months. I told her about losing my job, about feeling like everyone else was moving forward while I was standing still, and about how embarrassing it was to wake up every morning without knowing what I was supposed to do next. She didn't interrupt or give me some empty speech about everything happening for a reason. She simply listened. Sometimes, being heard is more comforting than being given advice. We reached a fork in the maze, and I confidently chose the path on the left. 10 minutes later, we realized I had made a terrible decision. We turned around, tried another path, and somehow ended up in an even quieter section. The sun was beginning to lower, painting the sky orange behind the tall corn. Our phones had almost no signal, and the cheerful sounds of the festival seemed miles away. We tried to retrace our steps, but every row looked identical. Eventually, Elara stopped walking. She looked around and admitted that she had absolutely no idea where we were. I laughed nervously, and she laughed too. But underneath the laughter, I could feel the same uncertainty that had followed me for months. I realized I wasn't only lost inside the maze. I had been lost long before that afternoon. As the light faded, the temperature dropped. We found a small clearing and sat on an old wooden bench that had probably been placed there for tired visitors. Elara wrapped her arms around herself and stared at the sky. Then she told me something I never expected. She said that she had been afraid too. Not of the maze, but of starting over. Her engagement had ended the previous year, and she had spent months pretending she was perfectly fine. She said everyone kept telling her to move on, but nobody explained what you were supposed to do when your old life disappeared before you were ready to let it go. Suddenly, I understood why her smile had always seemed so gentle. It wasn't because life had been easy for her. It was because she knew what it meant to hurt and still choose kindness. We eventually stood and continued walking, but neither of us was rushing anymore. The maze no longer felt like something we had to defeat. We began noticing tiny things we had ignored before: a ladybug resting on a leaf, the smell of damp soil, the sound of wind moving through the corn like waves across an ocean. Then we reached another dead end. I sighed and turned to go back, but Elara reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were warm despite the cold evening air. She looked at me and smiled. She said that maybe we should stay lost for a little while. I knew what she meant. Sometimes life doesn't give us directions because we are supposed to slow down long enough to discover what we actually want. We eventually found the exit when the sky had turned deep blue. The festival lights were glowing in the distance, and the farm workers were beginning to close the gates. We walked out of the maze still holding hands. Neither of us said anything about what had happened between those rows of corn. We didn't need to. Some moments are too honest to explain immediately. We bought 2 cups of warm cider and sat beneath a string of lights, watching families leave the farm. For the first time since I had moved into the neighborhood, I didn't feel like an outsider looking through a window at somebody else's life. Weeks passed, and things slowly changed. I found a new job. Elara started volunteering at a community garden she had once been too afraid to return to because it reminded her of her grandmother. We began taking evening walks together, sometimes talking for hours and sometimes simply walking in comfortable silence. Nothing happened overnight. We didn't magically become fearless or forget our pasts. We simply stopped allowing our pasts to decide what our future was allowed to look like. One evening, months later, we returned to the same farm. The corn maze was gone, replaced by rows of winter flowers. We stood where the entrance had once been, remembering that strange afternoon when 2 people who thought they were alone discovered they were both simply waiting for someone to remind them that being lost didn't mean being broken. Elara reached for my hand again, just as she had that day. This time, I held on without hesitation. Maybe that was the real lesson of the maze. Sometimes we spend so much energy trying to find the perfect path that we forget life isn't about never getting lost. It's about who walks beside us when we do. Sometimes a stranger becomes a friend. Sometimes a neighbor becomes family. Sometimes the person who helps you find your way doesn't give you directions at all. They simply take your hand and stay. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who may need a reminder that better days can still come, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need them more than we realize. And before you go, leave a comment saying, "I choose kindness," if you believe that one small act of kindness can change the direction of someone's life. You never know who might read your comment at exactly the moment they need hope. Because sometimes, the most beautiful part of getting lost is discovering that you were never truly alone.